Welcome to another podcast. This is Benjamin of the Signs with Don't Be So Off the Wall, Straighten Up and Fly Right from Studio J. That's J.E., Juan, and Eloisa, the two good people who had the good sense to give me life. We are coming to you from El Paso, Texas, Emma's Corner. Today on our podcast, we have Monique Navarro. She was recently featured in Forbes magazine as one of 20 women ambassadors fighting for gender equity. She was named as an ambassador from the United States of Women. She got her start in organizing with one of Obama's organizing efforts, Organizing for Action. And most recently, she has been named one of Amy Poehler's Smart Girls. And a smart girl she is. Welcome to the show, Monique.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
A buzzard took a monkey for a ride in the air. The monkey thought that everything was on the square. The buzzard tried to throw the monkey off of his back, but the monkey grabbed his neck and said, "Now listen, Jack, straighten up and fly right."
We're going to begin with today's poem, dedicated to Monique, who is an incredible human being as far as I'm concerned. The Blue I Loved. Maria de Guadalupe Ceniceros, citizen of Smeltertown, sings a lullaby explaining the color of the headstone on her grave. I love the August rains. I love the calm October days. I love the sound of thunder as it echoed in the nights. I love the breeze that made my curtain dance a waltz. I love the water in the river, chocolate as my skin. I love the smell of beans, the smoothness of the masa in my hands. I love the stacks of fresh tamales on the stove, the taste of yerba buena on my tongue. I love the rows of chile in the fields. I love the look on Mama's face before she closed her eyes and never woke again. I love the worn wood rosary she left to me, her only child, to live past 30 years. I loved the picture of her wedding day. I placed it next to mine. I looked like her. That is what I loved. I had her face, her eyes. I loved the stove where I cooked meals as simple as the wood I walked on with bare feet. I loved those pisos made of wood and loved the little flower of Jesus. She made me hers, and just like me, she loved the smell of candles and copal. I loved the afternoon we walked, just she and I. I loved to wake the house each dawn. I loved my children grumbling as they rose to meet the sun. I loved their look of hunger as they ate. I loved their loving me. I loved their look of pain when I grew sick. Their tears burned like the sun the day I died. I loved my husband's eyes, green as apples growing on a branch. I loved his hand upon my back. The roughness made me tremble. 40 years that man could make me tremble. He's buried next to me. In death, I swear he snores. We sleep the way we lived in peace. And one more thing I loved. I loved the color blue, the color of the room where we made love and slept, where we made love and slept. I loved the color blue.
That was so moving. Thank you so much, Ben, for your amazing words. When you talk about the color blue, of course, I'm always reminded of your amazing space that you live in and this vibrant blue that just every time I come across it reminds me of you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to chat and spend some time with you.
That's great. I met you over the phone.
Yep.
a little over a year ago.
Yep.
And you were organizing the Women's March. I got in touch with you because you had a wonderful website, and I wanted to congratulate you. I got in touch with you, and then I told you I wanted to get involved with the Women's March, and you called me, and we had this amazing conversation about actually politics and the things we believed in. And I had an immediate connection with you, and I think you with me, and we just became immediate friends. And so I really admired your passion, and that's what I want to focus on today: your passion. You got involved in all of these things, and they're about your community. You know, your politics are not just like this thing out there. Your politics is what you feel, what you believe in, your vision of the world and what it should be, and you know the why, and you've answered a lot of questions. You know what side you're on, and you know why you're on that side. So why don't you just talk about how you got involved in all of these things that you're involved in. You're involved in a lot of movements, and it's almost as if you single-handedly want to change the world.
Yeah. So, sometimes I feel like I'm a crazy person for wanting to change the world, but I definitely am passionate about it. And I remember vividly, that conversation with you. I think you and I couldn't hang up the phone because we knew that there was just so much more to talk about. And so we connected on so many different levels. And I know there were a lot of conversations about our lives and what brought us to that moment, and wanting to just make things right and make, create good in not just in our community, but for the world. And I think we were both really ambitious in that sense. And so we definitely connected. It was a really beautiful thing. I remember you reaching out to me. And I think what you're talking about specifically is the Accountability Project. And the Accountability Project was this idea, and I call these my 3 a.m. ideas because, I wake up at 2:50. Most people who are close to me know this. And, 3 o'clock, it's like it might be a witching hour for some folks, but definitely for me, it's like the idea generating time. And I come up with some radical things, sometimes some of them stick, and others I log them for another day. Like, if we're going to use them in our battle for, to save the world.
Take over the world.
Yeah. We'll definitely use them one day. So yeah, just jot them down. But the Accountability Project definitely, it stemmed from this idea that if we give people control of the narrative, because that's always what we're grappling with, right? Is like narratives coming out of DC, or narratives about El Paso being formed by people who are not a part of El Paso. And so, really engaging, educating folks, and then giving them the tools to take control of the political process was the idea behind the Accountability Project. And I remember you were really thrilled about it, which is awesome, because that's the point, that's the point, to get people to kind of feel the passion that folks like I do. And it's still alive and well, and it's, there's great people who are operating it, because, I've moved on to other things, and as I often do. But
it's still going on?
Yeah, it definitely is. It's still thriving. And so, with the Women's March, here's the thing. There was a Women's March in 2017, which was part of the national, movement. It was almost like this response to frankly, the nastiness that was coming from the Trump administration, the lies and the, just blatant disregard for everyday folks like us, And so I was definitely moved, like so many others, to be a part of the 2017 Women's March. One of the things that I noticed was that there wasn't a lot of conversation about politics, which threw me for a loop, because, as many of us who really love politics and have lived their lives and devoted their professions to politics, we understood that was really that was the core of a lot of the problems that we were faced with. Things that we faced here in the in the borderland, like family separation. Low income, low wages, quality of education. Everything affects us, and sometimes I believe affects us even more so because we're a border city. So it really kind of didn't make sense to me that we would hinder the voices of people who showed up that day to march, right? So I, again, like everything else, I logged it for another day. Maybe next year somebody, will organize it and I'll have a little bit more involvement. Maybe I could, add to that conversation and really push for the political conversations to thrive. And then next year came and it was 10 days out and we were not going to have a march in El Paso, right? I saw friends because, I work out of Chicago and at DC, and I saw friends on Facebook so enthusiastically organizing their own marches. They were definitely going to make sure that they had a spot on that national map and that movement. And here we are, El Paso, 10 days out, a city who's, a community, a region who's deeply impacted by these policies. And we aren't going to have a voice in that conversation. And that really broke my heart. I remember, 3 a.m. sending out a message to a really dynamic group of folks, including yourself. And it was really a call for action. What are we going to do? Are we going to sit this one out? Or do we feel like we need to be a part of this? And all of us, every single one of us said, we're going to do this 10 days. Let's get this done. And that's where we started.
And we did it.
Yeah, it was awesome. So 10 days, we called it Team No Sleep, because no one was sleeping. But it was super successful and people were moved by it. Genuinely moved. The stories that we heard. And you even heard some of those stories. Women who had just, survived a battle with cancer, marching for the first time with their daughters. Just beautiful, beautiful stories. And those inspired, they have inspired me. I know they've inspired you.
And they did. I remember when we were organizing, and we all met actually in my apartment for our meetings, for most of our meetings, but I remember being really kind of great that I was working with all these women. But part of me, it's not a man's thing, but well, why shouldn't men be supporting you and working with you? And there wasn't any men. And the only 2 men that were there were gay. And I said, well, don't straight men support this? And I've always thought about that, why? Just because a man is there doesn't mean they have to be in charge, and I wouldn't want that. But I don't know how I thought about that. How do you get men involved in supporting roles for women? Men always get women in supporting roles. Why can't it be the other way around? And I've always thought about that question. What do you think about that?
We talked about that. I think that there were several times where that came up, and you were always just amazing. So supportive, so encouraging, such a great addition to that group. And so, I really wished that more men had come to the table, not, like you said, not to take kind of that spotlight, but really just to be the Ben, to be there to encourage and to help, just
bring you coffee.
Right, anything. Come on, just show up and give us a thumbs up. That would have been awesome, right? There are men who stepped up. I know at the actual march, to volunteer to carry tables and chairs and just say, what can I do? I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes. So, at the actual march, there were, I think, strong mujeres came to that table, and it was like, I don't know how to say this without sounding silly, but, it was almost like we didn't really need, we didn't even need a man to be at that table yet. We did it. We got things done. Everyone rolled up their sleeves and from all walks of life, which was, to me, even that much cooler, that we had women professors, attorneys, writers, journalists, literally everybody was at that table. It was the most diverse kind of little, group that I had been in quite a while, and it made us so much better, and that the march was so dynamic because of it. So to answer your question, yes, we need more allies. We need men to step up. We need men to do the right thing. We need men to not be offended by the Gillette commercial and just how can I be more supportive, and how can I kind of check myself if I'm doing something that's not on the up and up, towards women. But at the end of the day, we're going to get it done. Women are going to get it done, but we could really use allies in our movement.
Well, that whole time that we were planning the Women's March, one of the things I had come to begin calling myself a feminist. And I thought to myself, do I have the right to do that? Because I'm not a woman. And then I thought to myself, what does feminism mean? And then I had to define it for myself in that sense. And that group really helped me, encourage me to continue calling myself a feminist, because for me, all it means, and it's very simple, it's a human rights issue. Do I believe that women are treated equal in my society? I do not. And because I do not, then I will say to myself, then I am a feminist. Until women are treated equally, that's I'm saying, I want that term to disappear, and it will disappear when the day of equality has arrived. So count me in.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? I think that as we were getting to know one another, your stories were so sincere. I mean, you spoke about your mother in such loving and beautiful ways, and everything related back to how you would have wanted your mother to be treated in any respect. And I knew that, at your core, you are a feminist. You do. Those are things you believe in. Those are values that you hold dear. And of course we want you on our team because you're amazing. So
we have a mutual admiration society. It's a little embarrassing, but it's okay.
So, I think another thing that people don't understand about and it's like the most simplistic thing that people don't understand about being a feminist is we don't hate men. We love men. Men are great. It has nothing.
Unless you have to date them.
Hey. Yeah. So the one thing that I would I wish that we could have more. It's just. And by the way, this isn't just a male thing. I'm going off on a quick tangent here. We were recently, and it was a group of people with the new Women's March Organizing Committee, and they were talking about people who encouraged them in the workplace and people who have held them down in the workplace. And so many of those stories actually weren't attributed to men. So many of those stories were attributed to women who are not putting that ladder down and helping, others up where they've succeeded. And so we also, I think, need to be mindful of the fact that, as women, sometimes we drop the ball. Well, sometimes we're not encouraging. Sometimes we're not supportive and we're not lifting each other up. So I think, we need men who are allies. But we also really need to be allies to one another. So sorry, just to point that out.
I think that's true. I think that happens among Latinos as well.
Yep.
That my generation of Chicanos, as we call ourselves, weren't very good at mentoring younger people. What many people in my generation did, especially the men, they wanted admirers. I mean, they wanted young people around, but they didn't want to mentor them. And I think that's what made me want to mentor young people, because some people stepped up to mentor me, but most of them were not Latinos. They were white people who mentored me. And some, did have a couple of that were very, very important to me. But I think it's very important that we train young people, or we help them, we give them what we've learned, because the lessons we learn in life are really difficult to learn. And we have those skills even if we didn't want them. I didn't set out to be an activist in academia. I set out to be a poet and a teacher, but that's what had to be, because I had to fight what I didn't want to fight. I didn't sign up for this, but we had to do it. Or we would say everything's okay when it's not.
Yeah. And where did that transition come into play? Like from just, I'm going to be a poet to I feel driven to be a part of change.
Well, I realized how difficult it was to create a bilingual MFA program at UTEP and how much we had to fight for it. I'm thinking, why do I have to fight for this? I live on the border. And it wasn't so much administrators, so much as the departments that were so used to doing things in a particular way that they didn't want anything bilingual. They wanted monolingual. The English department wanted to have an MFA, their own MFA. And then the languages and linguistics wanted to have one in Spanish, their own MFA. But they didn't want to have the two cultures and the two languages meet. They did, and they fought it. And I thought, well, I'm either going to let them have their way or we're going to do it. And I said, I helped write the proposal. I'm not going to, everybody said they believed in this. Well, and I fight for it. I didn't want, I didn't burn bridges, but boy, it was difficult. And all I really did want to do, it's a beautiful program. Everyone thinks it's a wonderful program today. Everyone believes that they supported it too, which is fine. But you know how it is, that you think that the good that you see, the possibilities and the dreams that you have, you think, why would anybody be against this? And then you start doing that and you realize, wow.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think that it was a noble effort, and I'm glad that you pushed for it. And, it is often difficult to change people's perspectives, especially when they're really deeply ingrained in like the way that they do things. There's, in terms of politics, that's definitely something that we're seeing a lot of. I think that we're seeing a lot of this pushback between the old guard and the way of doing things, and then this new generation of vibrant activists and candidates and politicians, right? And so, we're seeing it with Ocasio-Cortez. We see that she's really trying to shake up the system, and people are frankly uncomfortable with it, and understandably so, because this is kind of that time where people are eager for change, and now they're actually stepping up to affect that change. And I mean, those are like the bends, now, like seeing that moment where you need to shift thought and change the system to progress. And in terms of what that looks like and how it all pans out, that's really yet to be seen. But I feel like we're on the right track when we're pushing back against dangerous policies and things, especially policies that hurt people, and pushing for universal health care and those amazing things that should be no-brainers, but people for whatever reason, just like with the MFA program, for whatever their reasons are, have decided that we shouldn't have things like that. But it's those are game changers. We need game changers. That's where it all happens, right?
Speaking of game changing, this is not the only event you've involved in. The women's, yeah. You're involved in all kinds of other things. You want to talk about those involvements?
Yeah. So you had asked earlier where my passion kind of comes from, right? So a story that I'm pretty sure shared on my LinkedIn, because I was trying to be witty, is that when I was a kiddo, I was in elementary school, I saw an interview with Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and I thought, a little bit about my age, right? And I was so moved. I was like, I love politics. I don't understand politics. I didn't understand the political parties, but I loved politics. So I wrote, I penned a letter, and it may have even been a typewriter, and I received a response, and also it was, typed out. It's a really cool letter that my mom still has. And I thought, I knew myself even at that age that it wasn't, I don't want to be a politician.
How old were you?
Oh, I was probably 5th grade, 4th grade, something like that. I was like, I don't want to be a politician. That's not where I'm at, but I definitely want to be, who's the other person? And so maybe that other person for me was the Raging Cajun, Carvel, right? And I was like, I want to be that person. So who, by the way, is definitely an idol of mine. And so, the influencer behind the scenes, I'm always happy to be that person. And so, life goes on, and growing up in El Paso, there aren't a lot of outlets for political activism. There aren't a lot of outlets to be a part of like real game-changing politics. This isn't DC, you grow up in DC, there's like immediately someone's parent is so-and-so, and you're going to be like thrust into the system. El Paso's not so much, that's not so much the case here. So, again, life goes on, and I love to write, and I love research and communications and all that good stuff. So I think it was in around 2004 when I started really amping up in terms of like realizing what was wrong. I saw what was wrong. I didn't know how to fix it. But I knew that, I had a voice, and I really wanted to have a voice in whatever the potential solutions were. And so I started, organizing with friends and having more conversations and engaging people around politics. And most people are like, yeah, politics are boring, right? And not as enthusiastic as I am. But in 2008, I walked into a campaign office on Montana, and it was Obama for America, Organizing for America. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. What do I do? A hope and change? Sign me up. I am ready to go, fired up and ready to go. And so you started volunteering and, working within that system. And I mean, there's no doubt Obama's just an absolutely inspirational figure. I mean, he's fantastic. And so it wasn't work for me. It was like they were doing me a favor. They were, somehow everything I had always felt and, wanted an outlet to be involved in, it was at my doorstep, and I was part of the solution, right? So in 2009, for the Affordable Care Act advocacy, even though it wasn't advantageous for my family because we had insurance and our rates would inevitably go up, I knew that there were so many folks, especially here in El Paso, who don't have or who didn't have insurance. If you get sick, you end up in the emergency room, and it might be too late for some, and that is just a terrible way of taking care of people. And it broke my heart. It still breaks my heart. We by no means have a long-term solution, viable and sustainable solution. But I was working on that advocacy through OFA. And then again in 2012, later worked with OFA for President Obama's re-election campaign. And then continued with which eventually transitioned to Organizing for Action. And Organizing for Action has given me the foundation for organizing, the inspiration, like being around people who are in Obama's administration, working for essentially for Obama, for his values and the values of so many of us. It's just been remarkable for me. Along the way, working out of Chicago, working out of DC, it's given me a lot of outlets to other organizations like the United States of Women. So the United States of Women is actually was founded by Tina Chen and Valerie Jarrett, who are in the Obama administration. And the first United States of Women summit, the keynote was President Obama, and then Joe Biden spoke, and and that sounds funny because it's a United States of Women, but they're like absolutely amazing women who are tireless advocates for gender equity across the nation. Later, just for reference, Tina Chen is one of the founders of Time's Up, the Time's Up movement that we see, in Hollywood kind of, it's unfortunate that we even have to have a movement like that, but it's definitely time. And so myself being an ambassador means that I can bring a lot of those tools, those skills, my experience to help focus on progress for gender equity here in my community.
How is it that you were named an ambassador?
Well, that's kind of a long story, but I applied. And I was chosen. I was one of the 20 women who were chosen. And so...
did that surprise you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't surprise me.
Well, thanks, Ben. Again, this is kind of funny because, as I'm telling these are stories that are really personal to me, and it's stories that really I don't share on the outside. I shared a really fun one with you because I was coming to visit you one day, and it turned out that I got an email and it said, "Hey, by the way, we went live today," and I went and checked, and what they went live with was Amy Poehler, the actress who was on Parks and Rec, and she's really funny and amazing from SNL. She's SNL alumni. She has an amazing organization, Amy Poehler Smart Girls. And so they chose me to be one of Amy Poehler's Smart Girls. What an honor. And I would never tell anybody that, but I happened to be visiting Ben one day, right?
I was really proud of you.
Yeah, I know, because you're so sweet and encouraging. So I remember telling you, Ben, guess what? Check this out. And you're like, I want to share. I was like, do not share. We will not share this. And actually, now a lot of folks will know. But what an honor. I mean, how cool is it to be able to be, a girl from El Paso, Texas, where most people, by the way, have no idea. And I'm sure you experience this when you're traveling. They're like, El Paso, well, I have a friend in Houston. And you're like, not quite the same thing, right? So just to be that person, ambassador for El Paso, yeah, that's awesome. It's not even for me a conversation about who's United State of Women in El Paso. It's about bringing El Paso to the forefront in other conversations. When I'm in LA, when I'm in New York, when I'm in DC, I brag on this city like no one's business because I love my community, and I love to share all of the positive things that we're doing here. So yeah, I'm using my platform to spread some El Paso love. And
I do that too. I love that.
Yay! Yeah. All this to say, in terms of, we just actually worked on a big election protection campaign in Maricopa County. Kirsten Sinema picked up a Senate seat out there, who's amazing. And sadly, a lot of people were not paying attention to that race because they had Beto fever, which is great. But we did pick up that Senate seat. And I mean, she is spectacular, and she's going to be an amazing representative for us. And I'm so excited that I was a part of that change, that I made sure, not just myself, I helped a coalition to make sure every voter was able to cast their vote on election day.
Something about Maricopa County. In 1846, Maricopa County made every Mexican illegal.
Wow.
And ordered every Mexican to leave that county.
Maricopa County. Well, they've come a long way.
Good for you. Good for Maricopa County.
Yeah, and to their credit, and actually more, not even necessarily the county's credit, but even though there's some people who I'm not trying to dismiss doing great things in the county there, but there are so many amazing Latina-driven,
Latinx, they say.
Driven organizations out there that are primarily focused on making sure that Hispanics are able to mobilize, encouraging them to vote, encouraging them to use their voices. And I mean, from Chispa to Lucha, Mi Familia Vota, there's so many amazing progressive groups there that, frankly, I'm just like excited to model after here in our community. Yeah.
What else are you involved in? What's in the future for Monique?
Well, I thought that we were going to collaborate to save the world or change the world or do something amazing.
Let's raise some money and we'll fund something.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think that's where it starts. Let's figure out who's on our side and who wants to join our efforts, right?
And is it tough having your vision and wanting to work in politics and wanting to work with community grassroots people to find a job here in El Paso?
Oh, absolutely. It is an unfortunate reality that I mentioned that I work outside of the county, and that is not a coincidence. There is just, I think one of the main things is that there are no true progressive organizing entities here in El Paso. We do have amazing people doing amazing work with specific causes. We have Borderland Rainbow Center. We have
Las Americas,
Border Network for Human Rights. We have these groups, but they're kind of like factions, right? Like we have just, we have yet to build this amazing coalition where we could all work together for the causes that impact all of us in some way. I think that Women's March was so successful because there's a lot of intersectionality. People were able to see that immigrant rights, women's rights are human rights. It's as simple as that. So when we see, women in the LGBTQ community or women who are immigrants or, all these issues impact women in different ways. And it was really this catalyst, I think, right? And I'm sure that you felt it too, where people said, wait a second, what? And now all of a sudden we have this space for our voices to be heard. And I honestly think that that's where one of its greatest successes was found, is just in being able to unify.
And does you have a permanent office, the women's movement, the women's march?
We don't, but I think this is a good opportunity to say, a lot of folks are concerned with, there's a lot of pushback from the national co-chairs right now who have maybe intentionally or unintentionally hurt people in the Jewish community. And, you know, I don't know, have you actually?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so we, you know, here locally, we are not funded by the Women's March, Inc. So they don't control, you know, the way our events are organized or who gets to speak. They have absolutely no control on any of that. But I think that, you know, there is this sense of, until we truly disconnect, people still feel that pain, and I understand that pain, and I don't want to be a part of that pain. So if anyone who didn't feel welcome stayed home that day, then that's counterproductive. So, you know, as we move forward, I'm really thinking, and not just myself, the committee, the steering committee is really thinking about ways that we can move, you know, progress in a more inclusive way. We need, if that means that we need to move away from the Women's March brand, then so be it, because that's not even where it is. You know, Women's March is just the name. The people are what really make it. The organizers who spend day in and day out for days and days, like we did, to make this event happen. And then, you know, later in the year, we hosted tons of events. We hosted, we are now an official March for Our Lives chapter, which I'm really proud to say.
Nice.
Yeah, we hosted Families Belong Together for, you know, when the family separation crisis was here at our doorsteps. We've, you know, marched at Pride Fest. We've, you know, really worked on, like I mentioned earlier, we worked on this coalition building so that we can stay here past the name. So, you know, in terms of an office, we're really trying to figure out what our next step is and how we can, you know, really affect change in a bold and super inclusive way.
What do you have to say to the young women, both locally and around the world, about their involvements and their position in the world?
So I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I would say to the young women around the world the same thing I tell my daughter. You know, I of course tell her she's beautiful. She's the cutest thing on earth. But even more than that, she has the potential to change everything. Her voice really matters. And if she, you know, she chooses to use it in the way that I have, or if she does, you know, she becomes a writer, use it to do the most good. And if people are telling you you can't, push back. I mean, I look at Malala and what she's been through and how inspirational she is. And I think that young women just need to understand their worth. And if you don't have someone around you that's telling you how awesome you are, I mean, I will write to me. I will gladly be that person, your biggest supporter. You know, I think that too often young girls are kind of pushed to the wayside, told to be unemotional, you know, critiqued because they're bossy or you know, whatever that is. You know, we're constantly seeing, sadly, just the other day, we saw young women being harassed in the park by the Covington high school boys, you know, called names for no reason. The thing is, and this is super important, we can't change the world. Sometimes, you know, people are going to say things to us that hurt us. Sometimes they're going to tell us that we can't do something, but we need to make sure that we understand we absolutely can do anything we put our hearts into. And even if it's a radical, you know, 3 a.m. idea, do it, because you're amazing and I believe in you. And I'm sure that there are plenty of people like our allies, Ben, who believe in you too. You know,
What do you think? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you've been around the block. I mean, you were pioneer organizer for all that is good, especially on campus, especially for, the right to have a bilingual MFA program. In your experience, where are we moving forward, or have we progressed? Have we progressed a lot as in the Hispanic community? Or
yes and no. We have progressed since the Chicano movement. We have. The Chicano movement was very sexist, frankly, and it was guys. And we didn't, the Chicanas had to fight back, and Chicanas really kind of made their inroads into organizing and political community via writing. The writers did. The leading Latina writers came in, and they had a voice, and the men couldn't push them around, and they were feminists, so many of them. And we had Anzaldúa, who wrote, who was really This Bridge Called My Back, and she was wonderful, and did explosive things for not only in literary studies but really in the political arena. And she also had that funny joke that homophobia was the fear of going home, which I really love. Sadly she died very young. But the progress that I see now, I think a lot of people are really excited, younger Latinos, and they want to not be sexist. That's one thing that we've done, that your generation has done. Let's not be so sexist. I think that's where Latinx comes from. So they don't say Latina, Latino, Latinx. I don't know what I feel about that, because it's like, what do you feel about it?
Hey, obviously, I'm still very much attached to that. I actually referenced Latino, Latina, earlier. And some people might attribute that to me not being as woke as I'd like to be sometimes, specifically in terms of the Spanish language and kind of the authenticity, and being kind of removed when we try to reestablish what, I guess pronouns and it is, Spanish is very much, gendered.
It's gendered.
But how do we, that's actually, I think, a good segue to the question. How do we remain true to ourselves while also being inclusive? Because that's something I'm kind of grappling with, specifically in terms of the language. I mean, not anything else, really just the language. And I've heard arguments on both sides to use Latinx or, Latino, Latina. And I think that...
Yeah, and Latinx sounds so, because we're such a sensual people, it kind of desensualizes us, right? Latinx, and that's part, but it's really difficult because we do think in genders, and how do we get over that? But I do think that your generation isn't homophobic, particularly. Just as a general rule, you're not homophobic. You're not. You're trying to, at least the women, I think, are certainly fighting back. There's enough pushback from the younger women that Latinos are becoming much more aware of their own kind of misogyny, because I think we're taught misogyny. We're taught to privilege our own gender and forget about the other gender. And I think the your generation is much more aware of those things, where we're like, what are you talking about? Male privilege, what's that? It's like, it's so obvious, but it's not. It's not obvious to us, but it's obvious to you. So you've been very good about those issues. Do you feel hopeful that your generation will be more successful at changing the world than, for instance, my generation?
I feel absolutely hopeful. And I agree that in having those conversations early on with kiddos that are my kids' age, I mentioned my daughter who's 8, I have a son who's 10. And, it starts at home, those very open conversations about social issues, about people's choices, and really about, frankly, just humanity. How do we treat people? How do we want to be treated? And instilling positive values in our children, those are seeds of change, And I believe that, I'm a millennial. I think that we are a lot more aware, and we do put a lot of thought into, really taking care of, I'm not saying that your generation didn't take care of one another. I just think that we are a lot more willing to, understand where people are coming from and respect that. I think respect is a big part of it, and saying, those are your choices. I'm okay with that. And it's becoming very, very much the norm. That's where it should have always been, right? When you say, I am a proud gay man. Hey, cool, Ben. Awesome. I'm so happy for you. It just doesn't even, I'm sure that the experiences before, like we were kind of alluding to earlier, were that people were not as willing to say, oh, great. Okay, Ben, like, no, nobody. So
Yeah.
in thinking about that progress in the, Latinx community specifically, I think that we're definitely on the, fast track to progress. I've heard a lot of, actually we had an organizer on this Women's March Committee who came in and she said, I was born in Juarez and I'm here because I have a daughter. And she felt that the way she grew up was, she was in a very misogynistic environment, and that she wanted kind of the tools and know-how to, and really, I think it was more support, because we don't need to give her anything she doesn't already have. I think it was support that she was looking for to really encourage her daughter to be a stronger girl, and know that know her worth, frankly, and sometimes, dependent on, whatever your family life was, that's kind of difficult. You want to find people who understand where you're at, and having a support, and going back to Women's March, having a good support system who is there to say, what, you're absolutely right, and you're amazing, your daughter's amazing, and let's continue in other progress, because we've established kind of like a foundation of respect for one another, and how you should, I guess, like what the expectation of respect from others should be, right? So in terms of what advice for future generations, I mean, I would say that I think you mentioned love in your poem at in many points, and I think that it's silly and it's kind of like sappy, but we need more love in the world. We need to like love and appreciate one another, regardless of our backgrounds, what we look like, what our beliefs are, our political affiliation, whatever that is. I think there is a lot of hate, and that probably stems from this very, social media oriented society that we have now, where people are disconnected. People just don't have conversations like we're having. It's easier to fight with people when you're not face to face with them. So bringing back love, let's bring back the return of kindness, right?
Right. Do you think that the day of equality will ever really arrive, for that we all really treat each other as equals, and that racism will disappear and misogynistic men will disappear? Do you envision that day? Do you think that will really happen?
That I wish. I mean, if I had a magic wand, but unfortunately, I think the reality is a lot of us, tend to kind of like stay in our echo chambers. We hear all this amazing and like positive stuff, and then we look at the other side, and the other side, regardless, I'm not saying specifically political, I mean, we are very polarized right now, but there are people who genuinely are opposed to equality, genuinely are opposed to a system where everybody is treated equally, and for whatever reason have hate in their hearts. And, thinking about us, going back to our community, the Latinx community, we are faced with something that I never in my lifetime, or imagine that in my lifetime I would see, where people actually seem to dislike brown-skinned people enough that they're willing to put their livelihoods on the line. They're willing to fight for a wall to separate us, because those are their feelings. I mean, I don't understand them. I can't relate to them, but it's the reality. This is happening right now in 2018. We're facing these battles that, I mean, sometimes I can't wrap my mind around, So I think being realistic and understanding that there are people who just don't agree with us. They will never agree with us for whatever their reasons are. But not letting that take us down. We need to be strong together and fight this fight side by side. And the fight for me is, of course, equality, but it's multifaceted. This is a continuous intersectional movement that, if somebody falls down as we're moving forward for one cause, we're going to fight for them too, because that happened with Women's March this year. We were like, we're fighting for gender equity, yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, sadly, it was devastating. Another school shooting. And we realized if we're the people, actually, we were kind of called into it. It was crazy where people started sending us messages, text messages, online, emails, calls. It was madness where they were saying, what are you all going to do about it? It was like this great awakening for me when I realized, wait a second, people are relying on us. They see us as this movement that brings everybody together, and they're asking, what are you going to do about it? Well, let's do something about it. If we need a march with our brothers and sisters, across the world, and we need a common sense gun legislation, and that's what we're fighting for. That's the fight in March. Let's do it. We're going to fight, and if kids are getting taken from their mother's breasts and being put in cages, let's fight for that, because we all share these values. Maybe they're not always aligning, whatever the case is. We're stronger together, undoubtedly. And regardless of what the other side's doing, we need to just stick with the love I was talking about, stick with our kindness and make sure everyone's on board.
Monique, you're fabulous. I'm glad there are people like you in the world, and it's lovely to have been. You haven't anything else to say to me, to our listening audience, whoever that is, all 20 of them.
Hey.
68.
Hey, 68.
No, we have 70. We have 70. 82? 82 subscriptions. We're moving up in the world.
Yeah. So what is Ben going to do as part of this movement? That's because I love you. So
Ben is getting old. I think that's one of the reasons that I started Benjamin Inc. I just thought that maybe we could, it's not about merchandise. Yes, we are having merchandise, but it's kind of keeping the message alive. We have future T-shirts. We have Aristotle and Dante, which I think is a book I read, which is a gift that was kind of given to me. I worked hard at it, but those books are about understanding and love. They are about, boys are starting to understand themselves. Why can't we understand each other? Even if we don't understand each other, if we don't understand someone, there's no reason to hate them. It's like, I don't understand that. I don't understand a lot of things. I didn't understand my father. It didn't stop me from loving him. You don't have to understand people or be like them in order to just say, hey, he or she is one of us. And I think that maybe the merchandise that we have is part of that vision of how we have to stop exiling each other. We have to stop thinking each other that we belong to each other. And that's what I guess I'm doing besides my writing. And that's, I think, my contribution. I don't want to get tired. I don't want to go out saying giving up, because I think sometimes I do want to give up, because, the whole wall movement and Trump is like, oh shit, they're hating Mexicans again. I thought we were over this, and it doesn't matter to some people that I have been here 2 or 3 generations or 4 generations. I'm just another Mexican. And to them, that's all I am. Or I'm defined by being gay. And I'm thinking like, oh, really? Why? When I wasn't out, it didn't matter to people. I'm having, it's like, what is that scares people about me? And, I'm just a guy. I'm not that scary. I'm kind of goofy and dorky, but I think I think that we're used to thinking about things in terms of left and right. And Benjamin Inc. doesn't want to look at it that way. It wants to look at the world. Hey, listen, what is so left or right about equality?
Right. What
is so left or right about that? It's about human dignity. It's about treating each other with respect. And we make each other mad. And it's about restraint. It's about discipline and how we're so undisciplined. And maybe I want to have a company that has a little discipline that says, hey, this is a message. Sometimes a girl is a boy.
Yep.
Sometimes a boy is a girl. And no, I don't get that. I don't. I mean, I may be gay, but I've always wanted to be a boy. And I like having a penis, and I'd miss it if it was gone. But everybody's not like me. You know, everybody feels themselves to be different. And I want that legacy to continue. And maybe that's why I have this little startup company. And I want to have a podcast with people like Diego and Danny who believe in this vision, who make this happen, to bring people like you to say, you know what, maybe we can't change the world, but we can at least imagine it.
And hey, just come up with a radical idea and try. Throw it, whatever sticks. I think as long as we're moving forward, we're moving in the right direction. So I agree with you, though, about respect. I think that was one of the, I talked about love and kindness. Respect is definitely bringing humanity back to the conversation. I think it's seeing people and just remembering sometimes it's as simple as opening a door for somebody and smiling at someone. That changes things immensely. And that sounds so simplistic, but I can't tell you how many times my day's been like, true. I'm not saying by any means, because I know that this will get dissected, especially now things are in the progressive community, it's very difficult to you have to kind of walk on eggshells in terms of what you say, because they'll assume that you mean all problems can be solved with a smile, which is not what I mean.
Right. But I like to have I have an old joke. If you let a smile be your umbrella, you will be a wet, smiling idiot.
Yeah. But I do think, kindness and respect and just treating each other as you would like to be treated. The golden rule is super relevant today, I think. But in terms of your merchandise, which I think is awesome, I also think that it would be really cool to do a very specific thing. You talked about young trans youth and, collections that you can eventually maybe donate a portion of the proceeds to, to help and really invest in these organizations or agencies that are doing that important work. Because there are so many amazing organizations across the world who are fighting these battles, who could really use a little bit of support, a little bit of help. And, you have this amazing platform. You were given a gift. Your writing is just spectacular, and it's changed lives. And I'm so glad that you're here and that you've chosen to share it with all of us. And I'm so glad that you have a podcast now so that folks can chat with you and hear you. Yeah.
I think we can wrap it up for the day. We thank you for listening. Monique Navarro is a special gift, and to us here in El Paso, and I think actually to the world. I think we need voices of hope, and Benjamin Inc., that brings you this podcast, is very proud to bring voices of hope, voices that talk about belonging. Thank you for listening today. Thank you, Monique. We will talk to you next week, I hope. This is Benjamin Alita Signs from Studio J from Emma's Corner in El Paso, Texas. See you next week.
Straighten up and stay right. Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top.